Good afternoon, everyone. I can see a few people are starting to join the webinar here. Welcome to the 2023 New West Budget Breakdown. Our team is very thrilled to be here and to be analyzing one of the most highly anticipated budgets in Alberta's recent history. As I'm sure everyone knows, Budget 2023 is a pre-election budget, which means the decisions made in this document have a direct impact on the May 29th election and the very tight race between the UCP and the NDP. Today, I'm joined with Michael Solberg and Keith McLaughlin, who are both partners at New West Public Affairs, along with Christine Myatt, who's one of our talented senior consultants. In this webinar, we're going to be breaking down our team's initial reaction to the budget, which was tabled a mere 45 minutes ago by Finance Minister Travis Toews. In terms of top line numbers, Budget 2023 forecasts a surplus of $2.4 billion in the upcoming fiscal year. So we're going to delve into the budget's priorities, target audiences, and of course, how it feeds into the election, which I'm sure everybody is very interested in. I just wanted to note that we'll be taking questions from the audience towards the end. So if you have a question, please put it in the chat or the Q&A function below, and we'll get to it later on in the conversation. So without further ado, let's get started. Let's roll into this conversation. Christine, you're an expert in budget and government communications, joining New West recently from the office of former Premier Jason Kenney. Before jumping to our partners, I'd love to know, Christine, what are your main takeaways from this year's budget and what stands out to you the most?
Well, this budget to me reads like an election platform, which is essentially what it is. It addresses the UCP's weaknesses like healthcare and education, with massive investments in healthcare infrastructure, an additional $2 billion in education funding, a new health workforce strategy. It's really targeting those areas where the UCP has been historically weak. It signals to voters, I think, that the UCP intends to fight this election tooth and nail, and shows that they understand where they're vulnerable and they're working to shore up their defenses against future NDP attacks. The cynic in me does see the almost naked attempt to buy votes, especially in Calgary, but that's the advantage of being government. And I think the UCP will take every advantage that it can get before the upcoming provincial election.
Well said. And I think we'll definitely comment on that investment into Calgary a bit later on. But Mike, what are your initial reactions to the budget?
Well, I'll qualify this by pointing out the obvious. The budget was only tabled 45 minutes ago. So we're obviously still scrolling through it furiously in an effort to shed further light onto the nuts and bolts of it. But the obvious it has come to fruition. This is a pre-election budget with a significant surplus that the government intends to spend. And we're seeing all sorts of new line items and increased spending in certain areas as well, in an effort to bolster further prosperity of Albertans, draw investment from outside of the province, and get things built via the province's capital plan. So I'll hesitate to comment too much further until we really dive further deep into this. But no question, this budget looks and acts a lot different than past budgets. Certainly the earliest ones in the Premier Kenney government, where he had a carefully crafted path back to balance based off of low commodity prices, which were the reality then, and then obviously the significant and globally felt hiccup of the COVID-19 pandemic, which really affected the province's finances in a way that we had never seen. But that situation has turned around completely, and we're looking at those numbers now. So I'll hold off further comment, but we'll certainly have a lot more to share, and obviously with our clients directly.
Perfect. And Keith, I'm sure you'll bring a little bit of a different perspective. You've worked in progressive politics and with the NDP. From your perspective, what stands out to you?
Well, what stands out to me is, and I've been wondering this since since Alberta was clear, basically since last June, that we were going to have a massive surplus and that we were going to have an opportunity to have a conversation about what do we do with that surplus in terms of the relationship between paying down debt, investing in core public services, and investing in infrastructure. And what the government has come out with is a new fiscal framework as a component of this budget, which I find actually quite interesting. So it's a framework for dealing with budgets going into the future and dealing with surpluses. So what this framework is going to do, and it looks like it's a matter of policy, not a matter of legislation at this point, or at least most elements of it. It mandates balanced budgets with exceptions for disasters and sharp declines in revenue. It pledges that it's going to limit any operating expense increases to the overall budget to inflation plus population growth. But one of the biggest pieces is what it's going to do with surpluses and the Heritage Savings Trust Fund moving forward. So, the Heritage Savings Trust Fund is something that we don't really contribute to very much. We contribute to it when we can, like we could do it this year. But in fact, what I think the government's doing is more impactful here from a long-term savings perspective, which is, it's a multi-billion-dollar fund. It generates interest every year. We take the interest earnings and put it right back into government revenue. Last year, that was about $1.9 billion. So, and we inflation proofed it. So, but anyways, they're going to let the Heritage Savings Trust Fund keep that interest income on a perpetual basis moving forward, which is actually, quite a significant piece of sort of new fiscal policy. Then when they deal with surplus, it's 50% paying down debt and then 50% investments in one-time non-operating expenditures. So infrastructure. So it's a very interesting piece of policy that I think Albertans were interested in for several months. And so it's, to me, that's a piece that I'm quite interested to see come out because it's a very much a sort of a old style PC fiscal sort of saying we're going to invest here, cap what we do, but we're going to also save here. It's interesting to me because I think it kind of plays in that sort of corporate, or not corporate, but old PC Calgary voter base, which I think they're obviously trying to appeal to moving forward.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that fiscal framework stood out to a lot of people just initially. It's right on that top line if you go on the website. And I found it interesting that it'll require all future governments to balance the budget. I'm not sure how that will look in practice, but I'm curious to know, Mike, I see you nodding. Do you have thoughts on that wording?
I do. I do. And we'll see how the government's challenged on it. I imagine they will be from the media and others. What does that exactly mean? What is a sharp decline in revenue? What is that threshold? Balancing the budget is difficult. That's why it's not often the case, particularly when so much of our revenue is from trading on signal commodities and bitumen and petroleum and work from the oil sands, which are affected by global market forces. We have virtually no control over how those are traded in the global marketplace. So it's certainly a difficult exercise. It's certainly to mandate it through this fiscal framework. So to your point, Alicia, I'll be very curious how it's applied in practice. It's certainly easy to do now when you're buoyed by the types of commodity prices we're seeing now. But that's not always going to be the case. And by the government's own forecasts, these surpluses may not exist in the manner that they're existing now. So I expect the minister to be challenged on that, and I'm sure he's prepared to answer for it. But we shall see.
Absolutely. We'll definitely see how those conversations manifest in the coming days and weeks. Now I'd really love to know, this is a pre-election budget. From everyone's perspective here, I want to know, how do you anticipate budget 2023 playing out with voters? Because we are in such a tight race. What will the average voter think of this? And Christine, I would love to know what you think. I know you touched a little bit on Calgary, but what do you think the average Albertan looking at this is going to think and feel?
Well, I think that there is a little bit of something for everyone in this budget. The government has taken a lot of smaller projects and thrown, $1 million here, a couple $1 million there at, a number of pet projects. I think that everyday voters are going to be pleased to, for example, see planning dollars in the budget for a standalone Stollery Children's Hospital in Edmonton. They're going to be pleased to see ongoing funding for the Calgary Cancer Center in Calgary. There's a lot of goodies in this budget for Calgary, everything from, the Glenbow to the Calgary Zoo to, work on the Deerfoot, et cetera. So I think that it's going to play well with voters. And I think that they're going to be pleased that the government is trying to address the things that they care about.
Absolutely. Keith, what do you think? How do you think the average Albertan is going to react to this? Are they going to feel seen?
I think I think we'll see. And I think, pollsters are frantically going out into the field right now. And we'll have a bit more of an understanding how Albertans really feel about this budget. But is there anything that pops out to me as contentious or things that Albertans may not like about it? Not at the moment. And especially to kind of Christine's point, there's still goodies that are going to come out here in the coming weeks, especially around schools. So the government puts the money in the budget for the schools, but education will roll those out in the next, 5 to 10 days. And there's going to be a lot of, you get a school situation going on, which is, these things like they've already shored up a lot of like healthcare, the negativity around that. We'll see if voters, like, Christine mentioned it off the top too. There's the cynic in Christine, says, there's an element of vote buying here, maybe. We'll see if Albertans don't mind getting vote buyed. We'll see how some of this rolls out, because this is a really good news budget. It's an election budget, and they don't have really tough fiscal decisions to make right now. And I think that's why you see that fiscal anchor piece come back in here. They're going to spend now, but they're going to really put in different fiscal frameworks. So we will see. I think it's going to be, difficult for the opposition to sort of message some of this, given again, the pieces that the NDP has been talking about: healthcare, education, investing in public services. The UCP is going to fight on that territory right now. And so we'll have to see how Albertans react and how the opposition reacts.
Absolutely. And I think that opposition piece is a really interesting part of this whole equation, because as you said, the UCP has made a clear effort to prioritize healthcare and education, which are two areas that have been so central to the NDP's platform and strategy for many years. I'm curious, if you were advising the opposition, how would you suggest that the NDP kind of strategize and communicate in response to this? Mike, I'm wondering what your thoughts are.
To be honest, Alicia, I prefer to defer to Keith on this, because he literally advises the opposition. I can certainly offer some thoughts, but I prefer to pass the baton to Keith, if you don't mind. Keith.
Absolutely. Let's go, Keith.
I think there probably needs to be a bit more of policy detail coming out of the NDP. I think there has been a bit of a I think this was always the risk in not putting more out there in the past. Like, I've been talking about a plan to deal with the surplus since last June. We've all been wondering about this. And now the government has been able to put that forward. So I think there's an element of a missed opportunity over the last 6 months to demarcate some territory further than, we will stand up for healthcare and education with putting more behind that. We've seen them do that in the past couple of weeks. So I know that's sort of, hindsight issues. However, I think there needs to be a bit of a bolder plan in terms of and to start releasing that, as well as sort of, I think there is an element of an open door that you can push on by saying, it's a little too late after 3 years of underinvesting in healthcare. We've got chronic issues now. And it's true that you can throw extra money at healthcare. It doesn't change the system within 6 months. It takes a long-term time to turn a ship around like that. So I think what you can, I think there needs to be a bit of a more in-depth assessment of where the NDP goes from here. But there is definitely an element of, can you trust the United Conservatives to do what they are said they're going to do outside of an election period?
You know what, Alicia, I'll just add, when we're talking about who could be disappointed or if voters are going to be happy, I think, like any budget, there's going to be people who are very happy. But there's also going to be a lot of disappointed people. It's almost ironic, right? You'd assume that a budget with the type of surplus and revenue that this government is enjoying this budget, there'd be fewer disappointed people. But I think sometimes it's the opposite. It's a lot harder to say no to somebody and justify why you're saying no when they know the type of money that you're working with. And the government has not been shy in sharing over the past many months about the surpluses that the province is in store for. So no doubt, they're going to have some tough conversations with people about why they were not included in some of the strongest budgets that we've seen in decades. So there will certainly be disappointed people, but there'll be happy people as well. And you know, Christine, you rattled off a number of projects that are being recipients in this budget, and there will certainly be more as we uncover more. And I feel like I'm on, you know, Trade Center on TSN as we're literally breaking news as it happens, and our team of very talented consultants is filling us in on what's in the budget. And I see rural health revitalization, the capital plan more than doubled. So, you know, to some earlier points, the UCP are really going after some of their weaker spots. They're buoying some of their support in the rural parts of the province, which is key to their electoral success. They want to run the full gambit there. There's 41 seats outside of Edmonton and Calgary. I think smart analysis says that they need to win at least 35. So there's obviously some good targeted money going to at least those communities. And we'll start to cover more as our team picks away at it and as the folks on this call sink our teeth in once we wrap.
Absolutely. Another question I have, I know we talked about this right off the bat, but Calgary is clearly the battleground for this election. Rachel Notley just announced that her campaign office is going to be down here. And, you know, the budget contains a clear commitment to investing in projects in Calgary and infrastructure in Calgary, including, you know, that $541 million over 3 years to Calgary's LRT projects. Do you think that these investments will have a serious impact in swinging Calgary as we look to the election? Christine, I'm wondering what your thoughts are.
You know, I don't know if it's going to, you know, be super effective in swinging Calgary, as you put it, but it certainly can't hurt. I don't think that there's going to be a lot of disappointed people in Calgary when they take a look at this year's budget, and I think every little bit counts when it comes to winning Battleground Calgary. And the UCP, our, you know, recent polls show that they're in tough. You know, it's really neck and neck, and any little bit that they can do to have an advantage over the NDP is certainly going to be welcomed by them. In terms of voters, I think you know, Keith mentioned the old PC Calgary crowd that I think will be quite pleased with the fiscal responsibility measures laid out in this budget. But, you know, there are everyday voters in Calgary that are going to be super happy to see the kinds of investments that this government is making in their city.
Absolutely. Keith, do you have anything to add to that Calgary conversation?
Yeah, I would just add that, you know, an element of ambiguity in terms of what we like. A budget is like, I think we maybe overestimate what a budget will do. Certainly, the government's going to get a week to 10 days of good news out of everything that they're investing in. But is that enough? Like, I think the element that I, you know, would need to talk to a couple pollsters about is how hard is the, you know, the support for each party, and where is it soft? Like, who are we talking about when we're talking about swinging Calgary, right? I think we want to kind of figure out what types of voters we're talking about. Like, I think there's areas of Calgary that are already sewn up for the NDP. I think there's areas of Calgary that are not going to turn NDP. So what does this mean for, you know, the seats like, say, Calgary Glenmore, Calgary Acadia, these real battlegrounds that if one party or the other wins it, you know, that's kind of where that's a good sign of where the election's going. So yeah, I think it's not going to be bad news in the next 10 days for the government, but how much is it going to swing votes in Calgary, which again, neck and neck right now, and whoever kind of pulls out this city is on track to win the election.
Absolutely. I know we've talked a lot about how this is a good news budget, and a lot of people are going to be really pleased with all of the announcements coming out of it. I'm wondering, do we see any weaknesses right off the bat in the budget, or is there anything that stands out in terms of the UCP could have done more to anyone, or is this kind of just a top of the line good news budget? Mike, I'm wondering if you have any thoughts.
I'd say it's still too early for me to offer any real robust comments on where this might come up short. Frankly, it's difficult to come up short when you're spending just shy of $70 billion. There will certainly be areas where the opposition will try and shed some light into where the government should have taken this. But they're outspending the NDP's own forecast from when they were in government for this year. And the NDP are no secret, are far less shy about spending in terms of a governing ideology than this one. So I think if they didn't have a lot of good news from this budget, then they did something seriously wrong. It would be very difficult, frankly, to have bad news when you're spending like they are and investing like they are. But sure, I think as the dust settles, and we're now we're barely an hour into being tabled at all, but I'm sure as the dust settles, we'll start to figure out where the weaknesses are in this budget. Some of the more contentious pieces, frankly, where money has gone, where it perhaps could have gone elsewhere. But at first glance, no, I think to Keith's point, this is going to be a celebrated budget. It's going to buoy their support for sure. And there will be a period where they enjoy some really good media coverage from it. But keep in mind, the NDP are making similar promises. Of course, not as detailed. Opposition budgets don't exist. I've never been a fan of them when people have tried to put them out, but they're making similar spending commitments in areas like Calgary, the downtown revitalization of Calgary, promises to post-secondary students. Obviously, they're really digging in on healthcare and ensuring that is a top-line narrative of their efforts to get reelected. So there isn't a clear juxtaposition right now between the two parties and their spending aspiration, at least at first glance.
I think that's a really good point, Michael. And I think, going back to, my comments earlier, maybe this actually does provide an opportunity for the NDP to now they now know exactly what the UCP intends to do from a spending perspective. Some of these are things that, the NDP committed to a while ago in terms of, say, the new Edmonton Hospital, these types of things. What's kind of left out of this budget from a government perspective, and I think it maybe just shows that they feel they own the issue, is economic diversification and just like broadly the general economy. We talk a lot about healthcare and education, but we also know affordability and the economy are big issues. So, the NDP and the UCP are going to, the NDP can now know what to basically, what's left over to promise, they can outpromise the UCP. And then they can make that question about trust on some of these public services. But I think there's still arguments to be had about affordability and economy that aren't as much addressed in this, especially when you think about what is a forward-looking diversification strategy for the energy industry. There's a couple things in the budget, like the commitment to expanding the Alberta Petrochemical Incentive Program to support CCUS infrastructure. That's big, but that's not really fully detailed. There's a commitment to work out those details. And there's a couple other pieces, but we're kind of scant on that in the budget. And I know there's a bunch of other strategies that the government of Alberta is working on, but I think moving forward, we kind of know where the game is heading a lot more today in terms of May 29th. And so it'll be interesting to watch the parties adjust, because at this point now, the NDP knows a little bit more about what cards the UCP is playing moving forward. So, I think this is we've been talking about the unofficial start of the campaign for a couple of weeks now, but I think this is now the unofficial start of the campaign.
Absolutely. I'm wondering, before I move forward, Christine, do you have anything to add in terms of blind spots and possible weaknesses?
Yeah, we already touched on the fact that there's a lot of goodies in this budget for Calgary, and that Calgary, is clearly the focus. It's the key battleground in the upcoming election. But I think they focused on Calgary to a little bit too much and maybe left Edmonton out. I think that'll hurt them in the donut around Edmonton, the seats and the suburban ridings that the UCP hold. I think that there could have been more in this budget for Edmonton and for Edmontonians. And I think that, they're already pretty weak in Edmonton, but I think that this certainly didn't help.
That's a good point, especially about the donut outside of Edmonton. I'm curious to see how that'll play out in the next couple of weeks. One thing that we haven't really touched on yet in this conversation is what this budget means for the energy sector, which has been a very hot topic in the news and, in Alberta, Ottawa relations in the last few weeks. Keith, I'm wondering, do you have any initial thoughts on, how this manifests for the energy industry?
Well, I think the big things for the energy industry is, the CCUS infrastructure piece that, recently the provincial government and the federal government have started working on together and collaborating on, which was something that's needed to be done for several months. Again, this has been a conversation where industry has been getting frustrated at the inability of the federal government and provincial government to work with each other. And I think that's kind of made some progress in the last, basically since January, where there's elements of the government of Canada making signals that they're willing to back down on hard emission cuts on the level that they were describing by 2030 in exchange for provincial government working to provide additional incentives on CCUS and to but they still need to work at hard emission cuts, not carbon intensity per barrel stuff. So it's all kind of complicated, but I think there isn't much in here. I think some of this is going to roll out. Like we said, I think there's a lot of this hangs with a federal negotiation, which is fair. And what's going to be what the federal government is going to do with its budget in terms of an augmented investor tax credit for CCUS. To combat with the Inflation Reduction Act that the United States has passed. In terms of new technologies, hydrogen development and these types of pieces, I think we're also waiting on the federal government there too, because they have a series of tax credits that they're launching. So not much in this budget, but I think it goes to show, just to kind of put the political lens on it, and that's what we're doing today, is that the UCP government feels that they have a very strong record on the energy sector, and that they know where they were weak, and that's why they are targeting the public services and in this budget, and also a lot of infrastructure that makes folks happy in a lot of different communities.
Perfect. Mike, do you have anything to add?
Not really. I mean, I know I'm not going to purport to be an expert on kind of where the global market is expecting West Texas Intermediate crude to go, but the budget here charts it out at 72 to 74 bucks roughly over the next 3 years. But if that's consistent with past budgets, then they're being conservative on it, and they're smart to try and weather the storm should those prices drop. You obviously don't want to overestimate the primary source of your revenue, but in terms of where the energy sector is being taken with this budget, I think we're still peeling back some of the layers of this onion. Keith touched on a lot, and that CCUS program through the expansion of APIP as that materializes, should do a lot to buoy some very significant projects that promise to invest a lot of money, billions of dollars, not just in oil and gas. There are other projects outside of that sector that would be supported by this as well. So certainly was a blind spot because it requires working with the feds who have some enthusiasm in investing here as well. So I think there's reason for optimism. Premier Smith definitely has a different approach than her predecessor and Premier Kenney on some of this, and it should serve her well. But we'll continue to shed light on that as the conversations develop. And again, as we go through the budget at some length in the hours to come this evening.
Perfect. I just have a couple final questions here before we move to some of the questions in the Q&A chat. Christine, you've kind of seen the behind the scenes of, working in conservative government. And I'm wondering, we've talked a little bit about balancing kind of the fiscal conservative policies with appealing to stakeholders and, as you put it, kind of buying votes, making sure that people are happy going into this election. How do you think the UCP did in terms of balancing, fiscal conservatism and, appealing to that range of stakeholders that they really need to support them in the next couple of months?
I think they did a great job of striking that balance between giving stakeholders what they want, what they're asking for, but also being fiscally responsible. The new fiscal framework that the government intends to put in place really does, I think, solidify its commitment to fiscal responsibility. And I mean, this is something that the UCP ran on in 2019. And I would say that it's a promise made and a promise kept. They've done the hard work. They've balanced the budget, with the help of, massive resource revenue, a massive resource revenue windfall, really. But it's I think, struck a very good balance between the two.
Perfect. Keith, Mike, do you kind of concur with Christine's thoughts there?
Yeah, absolutely. I do, of course. It's a balancing act, especially with conservative governments, because they really think that Albertans care about balancing the books. And that certainly has been true in past generations, no question. The decline years in the 90s and in the early 2000s, that was absolutely the case. And that was a great source of pride, I think, for government, but for regular Albertans, was we were debt-free as a sub-sovereign nation. I'm not sure that is still something that folks care about as much. Certainly sounds good when you say that you've balanced the budget, particularly when you look at how jarring some of the deficits have been in past years because of the collapse in the price of energy and, of course, the pandemic. But we'll see how it plays out. I mean, there's obviously significant investments that can be made above and beyond. But for a conservative base, and there's a significant size of them, they're certainly shy away from going into deficit territory, especially when you're buoyed by the prices and the commodity prices we're seeing now. I think they would take great issue with that.
Yeah, I think it was, it's pretty easy to strike a balance when the biggest problem you have is how to spend this mountain of cash that you're on ahead of an election. And so you don't have to make a lot of tough choices, except for maybe how you want to spend your surpluses moving forward. So, I think there was a bit of a nod to both like the fiscal conservative side of folks who are more ideological in the approach to this, and with that new fiscal framework. And then also a nod to the fact that from a political expedience point of view, you needed to spend a lot of money in this election to undo sort of past misgivings that may be existing out there, especially on priority items for Albertans like healthcare. But it's not, you didn't have as many tougher decisions this year, given just how large the surplus was.
Yeah. And I talked about Klein, and I'll just give a quick shout out to great Klein Finance Minister Jim Dinning, who I see as one of our attendees today. Hello, Jim. I imagine you'll have lots of opinions on what we're saying too. Feel free to give me a call.
Perfect. Well, before wrapping up for today, I just wanted to give a nod to a couple of the questions that we have in the chat, just in case anyone is interested and can't see the responses. We had a question from Susan asking anything in the works for the Red Deer Regional Hospital, and we found that there is $320.6 million over 3 years for that center's redevelopment. Another question that we had was what kind of support was allocated to Alberta Crown Prosecution Services and Legal Aid. We found that funding is being increased to $24 million in 2023 to 2024, $31 million the next year, and $35 million the year after that. So those are the questions that I can see right now. The last one was about CCUS projects, which we touched on a little bit. Just asking any support. Absolutely, that's there in the budget. Not sure if anyone has any final thoughts on that before we wrap, but definitely.
Yeah, the only piece that is in the budget on CCUS is they're exploring options to expand the Alberta Petrochemical Incentive Program to CCUS projects. think there's some bits there that they need to figure out. One obviously is still negotiating with the federal government. The other is right now that incentive program is grants paid after you're in operation. I think there's there's an argument that it's more effective to do tax credits. And the province wants to, wait to see what the Fed's ITC re-up is. And there's still some negotiation around the emissions reductions pieces that the federal government wants to see. But there is a commitment to move forward and to consult with industry across sectors on that. So I think we'll see those pieces move rather quickly, especially once the federal government introduces its budget next month.
Absolutely. I'm not seeing any final questions in the chat here or in the Q&A function. So I think we'll wrap this up, our budget breakdown for 2023. I want to thank, of course, Keith, Mike, and Christine for being here, for giving your expertise on this very quick budget announcement. Our team is going to do a full analysis on what this budget means in a more in-depth view. That should be out shortly. And of course, our clients will get that as well. If you have any questions about the budget and what it means for you, please feel free to contact us. You can contact any one of our consultants, partners, and there's a lot of information on our website as well on the services that we provide. So thank you everyone for tuning in. This is a really exciting budget, and I'm sure we will definitely have more to say in the coming hours and days. So stay tuned for more from the New West team. Thank you, everyone.